Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Anne with an E, another book, another show. Karibuni sana. So, Legal 101 is all about educating the common mwananchi on legal principles, legal procedures, anything to do with legal. And for this reason, I just want to introduce the topic for today. First of all, I think I should wish you a happy new year. It's our first show, the year 2022. So we are doing matters to do with employment today, and I hope you enjoy. We are just from tough times. Not that they are over, but the COVID pandemic is still looming. And when COVID struck sometime in 2020, there were several researches that were done. And I'll just read a few. For instance, in the US, civilian employment fell by 8.8 million over the year 2020. In the EU, over 8.1 million people were temporarily laid off. And by August 2020, the UNDP revealed that for over 770,000 workers were laid off in Ghana. Then others had their wages reduced. In Kenya, we have the Business Daily in September reported, this is 2020, September 2020, reported that over 1.7 million people lost their job during the COVID-19 lockdown. With such statistics, it's best to define an employer-employee relationship. And essentially, as defined, this relationship is primarily by the fact that the employer has work to be done while the employee has labor to offer, obviously with the exchange of fee or wage. And essentially such relationships are governed by the contract, the law of contract. We've already done an episode on the law of contract, and you could go back and watch it before proceeding, and then you'll be at par with the law of contract and now what we're discussing today. And essentially, from this relationship, there usually arises duties and obligations. And some of the duties that an employer has is to work as long as the employer has provided work. And while doing so, you're expected to obey any lawful and reasonable orders that have been issued by your employer. And you also have to note that as an employee, you have to give your proper and faithful service at all times. Now, with that, there's also the obligation that the employer has over you as an employee. And essentially, an employer is legally bound to pay you for the services that you have done. It is quite paramount to note that in Kenya, unlike in other places, we normally don't look at time when we are looking at hours. Though it's provided for in the Employment Act, we normally don't look at hours. So you might find that you're working overtime, but you're not paid for your overtime. And it's quite unfair, but I wish we reached to that level of ensuring that each hour is accounted for, and where we attach, they say time is money. So we attach every single hour that we have worked to the value of wage that we are supposed to receive. And that is just with respect to definitions. Of importance is that you note that employment relations are largely governed by the Constitution of Kenya. And in accordance with Article 41, you have to know that it's defined as labor relations, and essentially every person has a right to fair labor practices. And you have to note that as a worker, you have the right to fair remuneration, a reasonable working condition, the right to join a trade union, and the right to go on strike. However, it is paramount that to note that when you're going out for your strikes, you have to do them peacefully and following all the protocols and procedures that have been laid out. Otherwise, if you start looting and destroying property, trust me, you will be arrested and you will be charged for other things. So when you're doing your strikes, make sure that they are peaceful and you're following the correct procedure. Also, you have to note that equally, an employer has rights just as you as an employee has. So does the employer. And with that in mind, you also have to note that under Article 36, you are allowed to form associations. However, make sure that you have to note that the rights that have been accorded to you under the Constitution are limited to the extent that you're not supposed to cause harm to other people. So when you're forming your associations and you wish to go on strike and all these things, remember to follow the law. Now, with that in mind, I have to highlight several rights that every employee has. There are four essentially, and the first one is the right to lawful termination. As provided for under the Employment Act, there's a way that when you're being terminated, it's supposed to be followed. There's a procedure that has to be followed. And for instance, if it's you've been terminated by notice, or you wish to terminate your contract, you have to do so by notice. So you either give a 1 month's notice. There's usually a procedure when you're being terminated. So it's not just one day your employer wakes up and decides to fire you. No, it has to follow procedure. Even for summary dismissals, when you are on, you've done gross misconduct in your office, there's still a procedure that has to be followed for you to be lawfully terminated. Otherwise, it will result to unlawful termination, and you have the right to sue your employer in such an event. Now, that is the first right. The second right is the right to reasonable working conditions. Essentially, as an employee, you're supposed to have to work in a conducive environment. It is interesting that currently we have decisions being made on something called WIBA, and that is Work Injury Benefits Act. So the WIBA is essentially supposed to govern things to do with injury that happen while under employment. And still, as there are still deliberations going on with the WIBA matters, you have to note that the reason why the WIBA is in force currently is because of conduciveness of your working area. And this is not just related to injuries caused in work, but it also relates to other things such as allowances, such as food, such as water. Like you have, at least in your office or where you work, at least there has to be some source of water for you to drink, okay? So those are the conducive environments we are talking about. And now we also have the issue of leave days. And as according to Section 28 of the Employment Act, every person has the right to an annual leave. Most of the companies or most of the organizations, they usually give a 21-day leave annually. So at least every year you have at least 21 days. Remember that you're not a donkey, you're a human being, and rest is required. There are also things like off days that you're entitled to. There are other things like maternity leave and pre-adoptive leave. And all these are enshrined in the Employment Act, and all these are your rights. And therefore, when we are dealing with employment matters, we have to consider such things. Were you accorded your annual leaves? Were you accorded your off days? We have to tabulate all these things if we are going to claim against anyone with regards to your leave days and your rest days. And finally, we have the right to due process on termination when it comes to redundancy. As depicted earlier with the statistics, we see that most of the workers were laid off, whether temporarily or otherwise, were laid off because of no work. And that is basically what redundancy means, that there's no work, there's no more work for you. So even when there's no work, there's still a procedure that one has to follow so that you're again lawfully terminated, because redundancy is part of termination. And when these things are followed, you realize that even your wages are paid off well, your severance and they're called gratuity, and all these things that arise from employment are cleared, such that when you're done with an organization, you're able to proceed to the next organization. And therefore, those are the rights, some of the rights that the Employment Act and also the Constitution afford us as employees and even as employers. And therefore, we are supposed to adhere to all these things. Now, finally, I wish to look at the general principle on employment, and this one is covered also in the Constitution. And basically, this general principle is the right to non-discrimination. You're not supposed to be discriminated against by your gender, your nationality, your status, your health status, that is, your disability, color, sex, religion. You are not supposed to be discriminated against. And in such an instance where there's discrimination, you have to know that this is a violation of your right as a human being and as an employee, and therefore you have the right to proceed to pursue as against such persons that have discriminated as against you. And that is generally what I wished to discuss with you, matters to do with employment. There's so much more, and if you wish to get to know more, you can definitely leave your comment. Otherwise, you're free to like, share, and subscribe. Otherwise, see you next time.